Welcome to the Creative Commons RX podcast. Before diving into this episode, I want to ensure we're all on the same page. This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are really tackling something big. We're looking at the strategic playbook needed, really, for managing some of the most complex and, frankly, most expensive medicines we've ever seen.
Yeah, we're talking about a major leap, a real technological shift in pharmaceuticals.
Exactly. Specifically, things like biologics, biosimilars, and those really cutting-edge treatments, cell and gene therapies or CGTs, all our sources. They keep using this phrase, a seismic shift in how we manage pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at any big hospital system, any health plan, their old formulary systems, well, they were built for traditional small molecule drugs. Simple chemistry, predictable costs, pretty efficient.
Right, they worked well for that era.
But now they're fundamentally challenged by this new wave. And it's not just that these new treatments cost more, right? It's that they need completely new ways of operating, new financial setups.
That is absolutely the core issue, and that's our mission for this deep dive. To unpack what we're calling the pharmacist playbook for actually mastering these advanced therapies. Because it's not just about reviewing clinical data anymore. That's kind of the old way. The new imperative, especially for pharmacy leaders, is moving way beyond simple cost comparison. That worked fine for generics.
Sure, substitute A for B, easy enough.
Exactly. Now it's about managing this complex web of clinical, operational, and financial risks, all interconnected, all at the same time.
Okay, so for you, our listeners, the goal today isn't just learning some new terms. We want you to leave this deep dive feeling equipped, ready to lead on this. So we'll lay down the scientific foundation, what makes these drugs so different. We'll help you navigate the sometimes confusing regulatory maze.
Yeah, it can definitely be tricky.
And crucially, we'll get into the methods you need to actually quantify the staggering financial challenges these therapies bring. It's about transforming the pharmacist's role, really, from just a reviewer to an essential strategic leader.
That's the goal. You have to understand the science, the rules, and the money.
Right.
And to really grasp the policy implications, the financial models, you absolutely have to start with the molecule itself. The differences aren't just minor technical details. They basically define everything that comes after.
Absolutely. So let's set a baseline. Let's talk about the traditional stuff first. Small molecule drugs, think aspirin, Lipitor, the pills most people are familiar with.
Okay.
Their key features are, they have a low molecular weight. They're made using chemical synthesis, which is predictable, highly reproducible, and we know their structure exactly. And because they're relatively simple and stable, chemically speaking, once the patent runs out, manufacturers can make identical generic copies. They're interchangeable,
right?
Generally stable at room temperature, often taken orally. No real special handling needed beyond normal pharmacy practice. That's the world we've built our systems around for, decades. Okay, standard stuff. But then came biologics. And this is where things really start to shift, a paradigm shift. As you said, the sheer difference in scale is kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. If you think of a small molecule like aspirin as maybe, a bicycle,
okay,
then a biologic, a therapeutic protein, is more like a jumbo jet. Huge difference in complexity.
That's a good way to put it. So explain that complexity.
Well, biologics are these large, incredibly intricate molecules, often hundreds, even 1,000 times larger than small molecules. And the key difference is they're derived from living organisms.
Living organisms? Like what?
Could be human cells, animal cells, microbes, basically living cells that are genetically engineered to produce the specific protein drug we want.
Wow.
And the scale. Take infliximab, a common anti-inflammatory biologic. Our sources mention it has something like nearly 10,000 hydrogen atoms, 6,000 carbons, 2,000 oxygens. It's enormous.
You can't just synthesize that in a lab like aspirin.
Exactly. You simply cannot manufacture something that huge, derived from a living system, with absolute, perfect chemical certainty every single time.
Which leads to that famous saying in the biologics world, right? The process is the product.
Precisely. The manufacturing process itself is proprietary, it's complex, and it's inherently variable. Even tiny little changes in the cell culture conditions, the temperature, how it's purified, the environment, any of that can slightly change how that massive protein folds into its final 3D shape.
And that affects how it works.
It can affect how it works, its stability, even its safety. This complexity also means you need special handling things like strict cold chain logistics. These proteins are really sensitive to heat, they can degrade easily, get contaminated. You have to keep them intact.
Okay, so complex manufacturing, special handling. What about the clinical side? What happens when you give these large, complex proteins from living sources to a patient?
The big one, the main clinical risk we worry about is immunogenicity.
Immunogenicity, meaning the patient's immune system reacts to it?
Exactly. Because these are large proteins, and often derived from non-human cells initially, the patient's body can sometimes recognize them as foreign invaders. This can trigger an unwanted immune response.
Which could be bad, obviously.
It could range from neutralizing the drug so it doesn't work, to causing allergic reactions, or even more serious side effects. So managing and monitoring for immunogenicity is a huge part of using biologics safely.
All right, so that's biologics. Now, let's move up the ladder slightly to biosimilars. This seems to be where a lot of confusion comes in. People hear similar and think generic.
Yes. This is probably the single most important distinction for anyone in pharmacy leadership, or really anyone dealing with these drugs, to understand biosimilars are not generic biologics.
Why not?
Because of that inherent manufacturing variability we just talked about. Since you can't make an absolutely identical copy of a complex biologic made in living cells.
The standard can't be identical.
Right. The regulatory standard, globally pretty much, isn't identical. It's highly similar. A biosimilar has to be proven to be highly similar to the original reference biologic, and critically, it must have no clinically meaningful differences in terms of its safety, purity, and potency.
So any tiny differences that might exist because of the manufacturing process have to be shown not to matter clinically.
Exactly. The variability must be proven to be clinically irrelevant. It's a very high bar, but it's not identity.
Okay, that's a crucial difference. Now, the top rung of this complexity ladder, cell and gene therapies, CGTs, these sound like science fiction almost.
They really are pushing the boundaries. If biologics are jumbo jets, CGTs like CAR T cells, well, they're maybe like personalized spacecraft. They're not just large molecules. These therapies often involve modifying a patient's own cells or delivering genetic material to fundamentally change their biology.
So we're talking about things like engineering a patient's immune cells to fight cancer.
Precisely. CAR T cell therapy is a prime example. These represent really the absolute peak of complexity right now. They often offer the potential for a one-time, potentially curative treatment for diseases that were untreatable before.
Which is incredible, but...
But, yeah, there's a big but. This revolutionary potential comes with truly unprecedented costs, often running into millions of dollars for a single patient's treatment.
Millions? Wow.
And besides the cost, there are extreme operational challenges. For new biologics, yes. It's comprehensive. It requires the manufacturer to prove safety and efficacy from scratch, with a full set of clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, large phase 3 studies. Plus, there's a huge emphasis on documenting the manufacturing process, the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, or CMC data.
So that's for the innovators, the first-in-class biologics and CGTs. But what about encouraging competition, like we have with generics for small molecules?
Right. That's where the abbreviated pathway for biosimilars comes in. This is the 351K BLA, and it was created specifically by the BPCI Act back in 2009.
BPCI Act.
Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act. The whole idea was to create a pathway to lower costs and increase patient access by allowing competition for biologics, but without forcing companies to repeat expensive trials unnecessarily.
Okay, so how does the 351K pathway work? How is it abbreviated?
The clever part is that it allows the biosimilar developer to rely, at least partly, on the FDA's previous finding that the original reference biologic was safe and effective.
So they don't have to reinvent the wheel entirely.
Exactly. It avoids forcing them to conduct large, duplicative clinical programs just to prove something we already know from the originator drug. It's based on regulatory common sense, really.
And this leads us to a really core concept that pharmacists, especially, need to understand and be able to explain, right? The totality of the evidence standard.
Yes, this is absolutely fundamental to how biosimilars get approved. And honestly, it's where a lot of the skepticism or misunderstanding from some providers and payers comes from.
So break it down for us. What does totality of the evidence actually mean in practice?
It means the FDA uses a stepwise approach. They don't just jump to clinical trials. The absolute foundation, the most critical piece supporting the whole approval, is the extensive, highly sensitive analytical studies.
Analytical studies, meaning comparing the molecules side by side in the lab.
Precisely. But using incredibly sophisticated technology, things like advanced mass spectrometry, chromatography, various functional tests. These tools create a sort of molecular fingerprint of both the proposed biosimilar and the original reference product.
And why is that considered more critical than, say, a big clinical trial? That seems counterintuitive to some people.
Because these analytical tools are so incredibly sensitive now, they can detect tiny differences in the structure, the function, the impurities between the two molecules with extraordinary precision, often differences that would be completely invisible in a clinical trial because of patient variability and other noise. So if that extensive analytical data shows the two products are, for all intents and purposes, functionally indistinguishable at the molecular level, it provides a huge amount of assurance. It strongly suggests any remaining tiny variations are clinically negligible.
So the analytical data is the bedrock. What comes next in this stepwise approach?
If the analytical data looks really good, the next step is usually targeted animal studies and clinical pharmacology studies in humans. These look at pharmacokinetics, PK, how the drug moves through the body, and pharmacodynamics, PD, how the body responds to the drug. They compare exposure and response.
Still not necessarily a big efficacy trial yet.
Not necessarily. Only if, after all that analytical and PK/PD data, the FDA still has some residual uncertainty about potential clinical differences, then they might require a comparative clinical study.
Okay.
And this is really important, the goal of that clinical study, if it's needed, is primarily to confirm similarity. It's usually focused on ensuring the immunogenicity profiles are comparable. It is not designed to independently reestablish the drug's efficacy all over again. We already know the reference drug works.
That's a critical point for pharmacists to articulate, especially to clinicians who might say, well, where's the big phase 3 trial for this biosimilar?
Exactly. The argument is that the comprehensive analytical comparison is actually a more sensitive and objective way to demonstrate high similarity for these complex molecules than trying to detect tiny differences in efficacy within the inherent variability of a large patient trial. Demanding redundant phase 3 trials for every biosimilar is often scientifically unnecessary, ethically questionable, and financially wasteful.
So the pharmacist's role as an educator here is key, explaining that the FDA has done its homework, essentially, using this rigorous science-based approach.
Precisely. Trust the science, trust the process.
Okay, one more crucial distinction within this 351K pathway. It directly impacts how these drugs are used in practice, especially substitution at the pharmacy level. The difference between a plain biosimilar and an interchangeable biosimilar.
Yes, this is a huge practical difference, and it's often governed by individual state pharmacy laws. A product that's approved simply as a biosimilar has met that highly similar standard we talked about.
Right.
But that designation alone does not allow a pharmacist to automatically substitute it for the prescribed reference product. The prescriber still has to specifically say, okay, switch to the biosimilar, or write the prescription for the biosimilar by name.
Which creates an extra step, a barrier to uptake.
It absolutely does. It creates friction in the workflow, requires prescriber intervention for every switch. That's why the interchangeable designation is such a potential game changer for driving savings and simplifying things.
So what extra proof is needed to get that interchangeable label?
To be designated as interchangeable, the biosimilar has to meet all the requirements for being a biosimilar, plus the manufacturer has to conduct an additional dedicated switching study.
A switching study? What does that involve?
It's a clinical trial specifically designed to show that patients can be switched back and forth multiple times between the reference product and the interchangeable biosimilar without any increased risk of side effects or any loss of effectiveness compared to just staying on the reference product.
Okay, so it proves alternating is safe and effective.
Exactly. It addresses any lingering concerns about subtle differences impacting patients who switch.
And the payoff for clearing that higher bar?
The payoff is significant. Once a product is designated as interchangeable by the FDA, state pharmacy laws generally permit pharmacists to substitute it for the reference biologic without needing to get explicit permission from the prescriber each time, much like how generic substitution works for small molecules.
Ah, so it enables automatic substitution at the pharmacy level, depending on state law.
Yes. And that dramatically reduces the administrative burden, makes it much easier to adopt the lower cost option, and really helps accelerate the potential cost savings for the health system. It's the gold standard for biosimilar efficiency.
Okay, so we have this ladder of complexity, small molecules, biologics, biosimilars, CGTs, and the different regulatory pathways. Now, how does a strategic pharmacy leader actually drive change within their institution to manage all this? The sources say the role is really expanding, moving beyond just reviewing trial data.
Absolutely. The pharmacist needs to become an integral educator, advocate, and trailblazer, as one source put it. It's a much more proactive leadership role.
Does the traditional P&T committee still fit into this?
The Pharmacy and Therapeutics, or P&T committee, is still the core engine for formulary decisions, yes. But it absolutely needs to be re-engineered or at least enhanced to handle the sheer complexity of these advanced therapeutics.
How so? What needs to change?
Well, first and foremost, it's interprofessional composition. It can't just be doctors and pharmacists sitting around talking clinical data anymore. That's not enough.
Okay, so who else needs to be at that table for, say, a discussion about a new biologic or biosimilar?
You absolutely must have senior representatives from finance. You need people from administration, from billing and coding revenue cycle management, and critically, from IT.
Why are those non-clinical roles so essential now?
Think it through. Let's say the P&T committee decides to add a new, expensive biologic. Finance needs to know the budget impact immediately. Billing needs to know exactly how to code it to get reimbursed properly. IT needs to update the electronic health record, the CPOE systems, maybe build new order sets.
Right. If you approve a drug but the billing codes aren't set up, the hospital could lose millions.
Exactly. Or if IT doesn't add the drug to the system correctly, doctors can't even order it. Or worse, order it incorrectly. Failure to bring these operational perspectives in early, before the decision is made, means even a clinically sound formulary choice might be completely dead on arrival operationally.
So integrated decision-making. And within that committee, what's the pharmacist's key role?
Beyond contributing clinical expertise, the pharmacist's crucial role is maintaining unyielding objectivity. They need to be the ones rigorously filtering out marketing hype, potential biases, and ensuring the decision is grounded purely in high-quality evidence and the institution's best interests. This is especially important when navigating the sometimes politically charged discussions around, say, adopting a biosimilar over a long-used originator drug.
That makes sense. Now, you mentioned getting these other departments involved before the decision. How does that work structurally?
It requires moving towards a more formal cross-functional governance model. Think of the P&T decision not as the end point, but as a catalyst for system-wide action. Pharmacy often acts as the central hub, coordinating the various operational spokes. Waiting until after the P&T vote to figure out the operational details is just asking for trouble.
Okay, so let's break down some of those spoke collaborations. What's the interaction with finance and revenue cycle management, RCM, look like?
This is absolutely foundational. Pharmacy leadership has to work hand in glove with finance or CM. They need to jointly build those budget impact models, BIMs, we'll talk more about later, making sure all the assumptions, uptake rates, discounts, potential revenue offsets are realistic and signed off on by finance.
And for the really expensive stuff like CGTs?
For CGTs, the collaboration is even deeper. They have to jointly assess the feasibility of these novel payment models, like outcomes-based contracts or annuity payments. Can the finance department actually administer a 5-year payment plan? Does RCM have the mechanisms to track outcomes for potential rebates? If finance says, no, we can't bill it that way, the therapy might be a non-starter for the institution, regardless of the clinical benefit.
Okay, what about the supply chain team? Beyond just ordering the drugs.
Their role becomes much more strategic with these complex therapies. For all biologics, they're critical partners in ensuring the cold chain integrity from doc to patient. Any temperature excursion can ruin a very expensive product. For CGTs, their role is even more specialized. They might be managing the logistics of shipping patient cells, receiving the engineered product back, overseeing specialized storage like liquid nitrogen freezers, which might require a capital investment. They also have to rigorously evaluate the manufacturer's reliability. If it's a single-source, patient-specific CGT, A manufacturing delay isn't just an inconvenience, it could be catastrophic for the patient.
And IT integration, you mentioned updating EHRs. How does pharmacy lead that?
Pharmacy has to be the driver here. They need to ensure that as soon as a decision is made, the IT systems, the EHR, the CPOE, the pharmacy dispensing system are updated immediately and accurately. This means putting in the correct non-proprietary name and, crucially for biosimilars, that unique four-letter suffix.
Why is that suffix so important from an IT perspective?
It's a critical patient safety and tracking feature. It ensures that everyone, prescribers, nurses, pharmacists, billers, knows exactly which product the patient received. It prevents accidental switching if two products have similar names, and it's essential for pharmacovigilance, tracking any potential adverse events back to the specific product used.
And IT can also help drive appropriate use.
Yes, through clinical decision support, CDS. Pharmacy works with IT to build rules or modify order sets. For example, making the institution's preferred biosimilar the default option when a doctor orders that type of drug for a specific indication. It's a gentle nudge that makes it easy to do the right thing and helps achieve those uptake goals from the BIM.
Okay, let's zoom in on the CGTs again, because the operational complexity there seems off the charts. You mentioned the traditional P&T structure might not even be sufficient.
Often it's not. Because of the multi-million-dollar price tags, the incredibly complex logistics, and the significant institutional investment required, many organizations are finding they need shifting governance for CGTs.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning the creation of specialized emerging therapies, or advanced therapeutics committees. These committees typically report higher up the chain, and critically, they must involve senior executive leadership. Think the C-suite. CFO, COO, Chief Medical Officer, maybe even legal counsel right from the very beginning.
Why the C-suite involvement from day one?
Because adopting a CGT isn't just adding another drug to the formulary. It's a major strategic decision for the entire institution. It involves significant financial risk, potential capital investments in things like specialized freezers or clean rooms, dedicated staffing and training, new workflows across multiple departments, and potentially complex legal agreements with manufacturers. The C-suite needs to understand and approve that level of commitment.
Makes sense. And within this high-stakes environment, the hospital pharmacist role becomes incredibly hands-on, almost like an air traffic controller for the therapy. Let's use ERT cells as an example again. Walk us through the pharmacist's logistical role there.
It's incredibly detailed. The pharmacist, often a specialized oncology or cell therapy pharmacist, is frequently responsible for overseeing the entire chain of identity and chain of custody.
Chain of identity, chain of custody. What does that mean?
It means meticulously tracking and verifying the patient's specific cells at every single step. From the moment the patient's T cells are collected, apheresis, verifying the labeling, managing the shipment to the manufacturer for genetic engineering, tracking the manufacturing process, receiving the final engineered CAR or T cell product back at the institution, verifying again that it's the right product for the right patient.
So ensuring patient A's cells don't somehow end up going to patient B.
Exactly. An error in identity would be an absolute disaster, giving the wrong patient someone else's engineered cells. So there are multiple checks, electronic tracking, double sign-offs. The pharmacist is often the central coordinator, ensuring that chain remains unbroken and documented. They also manage the storage upon receipt, which usually involves validated, ultra-low temperature liquid nitrogen freezers with continuous monitoring.
Okay, so tracking and storage. What about the moment just before it's given to the patient? That sounds like a high-pressure point.
It absolutely is. It's arguably the point of highest operational risk. The pharmacist is typically responsible for the final preparation, executing the validated aseptic thawing procedure for the cryopreserved cells, usually right at the patient's bedside or in a nearby clean room immediately before the infusion starts.
Aseptic thawing.
Yes, these procedures are often very specific, time-sensitive. Sometimes the product is only stable for 30 or 60 minutes after thawing and must be done under strict sterile conditions. The material is irreplaceable. If there's an error, the bag breaks, sterility is compromised, the temperature is wrong, the wrong diluent is used, that entire multi-million-dollar patient-specific dose is lost, gone.
Wow, the pressure must be immense.
It is. The pharmacist performing that thaw holds an incredible amount of responsibility in that moment. They have to ensure the procedure is followed perfectly every single time.
Okay, beyond those intense logistics, what about the clinical management aspects led by pharmacy?
It's comprehensive. The pharmacist is deeply involved in the patient's overall treatment plan. This often includes managing or verifying the lymphodepleting chemotherapy regimens the patient receives beforehand, to make space for the CAR T cells.
Right, preparing the body.
Exactly. But perhaps even more critical is leading the proactive toxicity management. CGTs, especially CAR T cells, come with unique and potentially severe side effects like cytokine release syndrome, CRS, and neurotoxicity ICANS.
CRS and ICANS, these can be serious.
They can be life-threatening if not managed properly.
Hmm.
So the pharmacy team plays a key role in developing institutional protocols for grading these toxicities, recognizing them early, and initiating treatment. This includes ensuring that critical rescue medications, like tocilizumab for CRS, are immediately available 24/7, often as part of the FDA-mandated Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy, or REMS program.
So given all this, the cost, the complexity, the risks, the small patient numbers in early trials, the way an institution decides whether to adopt a CGT must be fundamentally different from how they review, say, a new antibiotic.
Entirely different. The specialized evaluation questions shift significantly. You're often looking at data from smaller, sometimes single-arm trials, so you have to critically assess the durability of the clinical benefit. Is this truly a long-lasting effect?
Okay.
But perhaps the most defining question the committee, especially that higher-level governance committee, must wrestle with is operational feasibility. It boils down to, can our specific institution, with our current staff, expertise, facilities, and processes, actually deliver this therapy safely, effectively, and reliably, day in and day out? The clinical promise is irrelevant if the institution can't execute the delivery perfectly. It's a strategic commitment.
Okay, we've hit the science, the regulation, the intense operations. Now let's talk money. Because leading these formulary decisions means speaking the language of health economics. We need to be clear on the main tools used to justify these choices, particularly BIA versus CEA.
Right. These terms get thrown around, but they answer very different questions. The workhorse for most real-world formulary decisions, especially in hospitals or health plans dealing with annual budgets, is the Budget Impact Analysis, or BIA.
BIA, what's its focus?
Its focus is squarely on affordability in the short term. It estimates the net change in spending, the financial consequences, if you adopt a new drug or switch therapies, usually over a defined period like the next 3 to 5 budget years.
So the simple question a BIA answers is, can we afford this drug within our current budget? What's the dollar impact going to be next year or over the next few years?
Exactly. It's about the immediate financial hit or savings. How does this decision affect our bottom line in the near future? Now, contrast that with cost-effectiveness analysis, or CEA.
CEA, that sounds more academic.
It often is, though it's still very important. CEA takes a much longer-term view and compares the relative costs of different treatments against their relative health outcomes. Outcomes are often measured in things like life years gained, or more commonly, quality-adjusted life years, QALYs.
QALYs, trying to put a value on quality of life.
Kind of, yeah. So the question a CEA tries to answer is more like, does this drug offer good value for money over the long run, considering both its cost and the health benefits it provides compared to alternatives?
So BIA is it affordable now? CEA is it good value long term?
That's a great way to summarize it. And while CEA is really important for understanding the societal value of a therapy and for informing broader coverage policies, in the actual P&T committee meeting or the budget meeting with the CFO,
The BIA often carries more weight.
often yes, because it directly addresses the immediate question of affordability and impact on the current operating budget. The BIA tells the decision makers what the financial hit will be next quarter or next year, which is also their most pressing concern.
Yeah.
Hashtag 3.2. Building the biosimilar budget impact model, BIM.
Okay, so if the BIA is the key tool for affordability, the actual budget impact model, or BIM, is how pharmacy leaders make their case, especially for things like driving biosimilar adoption to save money.
Exactly. The BIM is the financial justification, the business case. To be effective, it needs to be built carefully, transparently, and be defensible.
What are the core components of a solid biosimilar BIM?
It usually starts by comparing two clear scenarios over that defined time horizon, say 3 to 5 years. Scenario A is your baseline, the status quo or reference scenario. What happens financially if we continue using the originator biologic like we are now?
Okay, business as usual.
Right. Then you model scenario B, the new scenario. What happens if we actively promote and adopt the new biosimilar and it achieves a certain level of market share?
And the credibility of that scenario B hinges entirely on the assumptions you make, right? This seems like where it could get tricky.
Absolutely. That's why collaboration with finance and maybe even supply chain is crucial here. The most sensitive inputs, the ones that really drive the results, are typically the assumed market share or uptake rate for the biosimilar.
How do you set that realistically?
You need to be conservative, especially in the early years. Don't just plug in 80% uptake in year one. Maybe start with 10% or 20% based on historical experience with other formulary changes, prescriber education plans, and maybe looking at external market benchmarks. It should be a realistic, achievable target. The other key input is, of course, the biosimilar discount.
How much cheaper is it than the originator?
Typically at launch, biosimilars come in somewhere between 15% to maybe 30% or 35% lower than the reference product's list price or contracted price. You need to use the best available estimate for your model.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the market isn't static. The original drug manufacturer isn't just going to sit there.
Exactly. A really sophisticated BIM, one that's more likely to be accurate, absolutely must account for originator price erosion. As soon as a biosimilar enters the market and starts taking share, the manufacturer of the original biologic will almost certainly lower their price to compete.
So the savings might not be as simple as just the biosimilar discount times the uptake.
Right. Your model needs to factor in an estimated rate at which the originator's price will also decrease over time. This gives a more realistic picture of the net savings attributable to the biosimilar adoption strategy, because the overall market price for that drug class is likely to fall anyway due to competition.
Okay, so you build the model, run the numbers, comparing scenario A and B. How do you present the results to make the biggest impact on decision makers?
You calculate the bottom line first, the net budget impact. That's simply the total cost of scenario B with the biosimilar minus the total cost of scenario A, status quo. A negative number means savings, which is usually the goal with biosimilars.
So show the total savings.
Yes, show the cumulative savings over the 3 or 5 year period. That's a headline number.
Oh.
But often what resonates even more, especially with health plan executives or hospital finance leaders, is translating that saving into a per member per month, PMPM, or maybe per patient per year metric.
Why PMPM? Why break it down like that?
PMPM is the standard currency in health economics, especially on the payer side. It normalizes the cost or savings across the entire covered population, making it easier to compare the impact of this specific drug decision to all the other healthcare costs they manage. It tells them the efficiency gain per person covered. It helps them understand the scale relative to their whole budget.
Got it. And one final step for a credible BIM, since it's all based on assumptions.
You absolutely have to perform sensitivity analysis. This is critical for testing how robust your savings projections are. Are the savings heavily dependent on one single assumption?
How do you do that?
The most common method is one-way sensitivity analysis. You take your key input assumptions, usually the biosimilar uptake rate and the price discount are the most influential, and you systematically vary them one at a time across a plausible range. For example, what if uptake is only 5%? What if it's 30%? What if the discount is only 10% or 25%?
And that shows.
It shows how sensitive the projected savings are to changes in those key variables. It helps identify the biggest risks and opportunities. If the model shows that even with lower uptake or a smaller discount, you still achieve significant savings, that builds confidence. It also tells the implementation team exactly which factors, like driving uptake, they need to focus on operationally to actually realize the savings predicted by the model. It makes the BIM an accountable plan, not just a forecast.
Okay, so BIMs help us manage the finances of biosimilars within the existing sort of framework. But CGTs, these multi-million-dollar, potentially one-time cures, they seem to break the traditional payment model entirely. Why does the standard fee-for-service system fail so badly here?
Yeah, our sources consistently point this out. The traditional reimbursement model is fundamentally broken for CGTs for several key reasons.
What's the first big one?
The first is just the extreme cost concentration. You have this enormous cost, potentially several $1,000,000, hitting the payer's budget all at once, up front for a single patient.
Right, not spread out over years like managing a chronic disease.
Exactly. It creates this massive acute budget shock that most health plans or even large hospital systems simply aren't structured to absorb easily within a quarterly or annual budget cycle.
Okay, that's the upfront shock. What else?
The second major problem is the uncertainty of long-term outcomes, especially when these therapies first launch. The clinical trial data might only extend out a few years.
So we don't know for sure if the cure will last for 10, 20 years or life.
Precisely. But the payer pays the full multi-million-dollar price tag up front. If the therapy's effect wears off after, say, 5 years, and the patient needs other expensive treatments again, the payer has already spent the money and bears 100% of that risk of treatment failure or waning efficacy.
That seems like a tough risk for them to take.
It is. And the third factor, which is a really thorny issue in the fragmented U.S. healthcare system, is patient portability. Some sources call this the tragic commons problem.
The tragic commons. Explain that.
Okay, imagine a health plan covers the $3 million cost for potentially curative gene therapy for a child with a rare genetic disease. The therapy works, the child is effectively cured, great outcome.
Fantastic.
But then, 3 years later, the child's parents change jobs, and the family switches to a different health insurance plan. The initial payer paid the entire $3 million cost. But the new payer now gets the long-term financial benefit of insuring a healthy child who likely needs very little expensive medical care going forward.
So the first payer bears all the cost and risk, but the downstream benefit accrues to someone else entirely.
Exactly. There's a fundamental misalignment of incentives. Individual payers might rationally choose not to cover these incredibly expensive upfront therapies if they know they're unlikely to keep that patient long enough to reap the long-term savings from avoided hospitalizations or other chronic care costs.
That definitely sounds like a broken model, potentially hindering access. So how do we fix it? What are the solutions emerging?
To bridge this gap between the upfront cost, the long-term value, and the risk uncertainty, we're seeing the development and implementation of innovative risk-sharing payment models. These are absolutely essential for making CGTs financially sustainable.
Okay, risk sharing. What forms do these take?
There are a couple of main approaches. One directly addresses that upfront budget shock, annuity-based or staggered payments.
Like paying in installments?
Eventually, yes. Instead of the payer handing over $3 million in one go, the manufacturer agrees to accept the payment spread out over several years, maybe 5 years, for example. The total cost might be the same or slightly higher due to financing, but makes the annual budget impact much more manageable and predictable for the payer. We saw proposals like this for Zolgensma, for instance.
Okay, so spreading the cost helps with affordability. What about addressing the risk of the treatment not working long term?
That's where outcomes-based rebates, sometimes called pay-for-performance agreements, come in. This is becoming increasingly common.
How does that work?
The payer typically pays the full high price for the CGT upfront. However, they have a contract with the manufacturer that stipulates if the patient fails to achieve or maintain certain predefined clinical outcomes by a specific time point, the manufacturer has to issue a substantial rebate back to the payer.
A rebate if it doesn't work as promised? How substantial are we talking?
It can be very significant. Sometimes the contracts call for rebates of 50%, 80%, or even higher if the treatment fails according to the agreed-upon metrics.
What kind of metrics define success or failure in these contracts? It must be tricky.
It is, and it has to be specific to the therapy and the disease. For example, for Luxturna, the gene therapy for a type of inherited blindness, the outcome metric might be achieving a certain measurable improvement in vision score at 1 year. For a CAR T-cell therapy, it might be maintaining cancer remission at 18 or 24 months. For a gene therapy for beta thalassemia, it could be maintaining transfusion independence for a defined period.
So the outcomes have to be objective, measurable, clinically meaningful.
And administratively feasible for the payer and provider to actually track over potentially many years. Defining these outcome metrics and the associated contracts is incredibly complex.
Which sounds like it puts the pharmacist in a new role again, not just evaluating clinical efficacy, but helping structure these financial deals.
Absolutely. This is a huge shift towards strategic risk management for pharmacy leaders, especially those in health systems or payer organizations. They become a critical bridge between the clinical evidence and the financial terms of the deal.
How so?
The pharmacist uses their deep clinical understanding of the therapy and the disease to help the institution define those appropriate, measurable outcomes that should trigger a rebate. They need to ensure the metrics are fair, achievable, and truly reflect treatment success or failure.
And they also need to model the financial implications of these deals.
Yes. They need to conduct scenario modeling to project the institution's potential financial exposure under these value-based contracts. What's the likely probability of patients meeting the outcomes versus failing? What's the potential range of rebate payments the institution might receive? It's about quantifying the financial risk and reward tied directly to clinical performance. This is a far cry from just negotiating a simple discount percentage.
Okay, so let's say the P&T committee, or the Advanced Therapeutics Committee, makes the decision. They've done the clinical review, the operational assessment, the financial modeling. They decide to add the new biologic, biosimilar, or CGT. But you said earlier, that's maybe only 10% of the work.
Easily. The journey from that decision to actually executing it successfully in daily practice requires enormous coordination and sustained leadership, particularly from pharmacy. We often talk about the implementation triad being crucial here.
The implementation triad, what are the three legs of that stool?
It requires seamless integration and constant communication between 1, pharmacy, 2, supply chain, and 3, finance revenue cycle management, RC.
Okay, break down their roles in the implementation phase.
Pharmacy typically leads the clinical aspects, developing standardized order sets in the EHR, creating dosing guidelines, providing education to physicians, nurses, and other pharmacists. Supply chain handles the procurement, negotiating the final contracts based on the formulary decision, managing inventory levels, and ensuring that critical cold chain or specialized handling for CGTs. And finance or CM is responsible for ensuring the billing and coding systems are updated correctly, that prior authorizations are handled smoothly, and, importantly, tracking the actual financial performance against the projections made in the BIM.
And if one part of that triad drops the ball,
The whole implementation can fail, or at least fall far short of expectations. Imagine pharmacy does great education. Supply chain gets a good price on a biosimilar, but finance or CM fails to load the right billing codes. The institution uses the drug, saves money on acquisition, but then can't get reimbursed properly. The overall financial goal is missed completely. The triad has to work in perfect sync.
Now, a big challenge, particularly when implementing biosimilars, is often stakeholder hesitancy. Getting buy-in from prescribers who might be comfortable with the originator drug they've used for years.
Yes, this is a really common hurdle, and it often stems back to that misunderstanding of the totality of the evidence standard, or maybe just inertia and comfort with the familiar.
So how do you overcome that? You can't just mandate it, right?
Mandates rarely work well for changing clinical practice. The most effective strategy is a carefully planned, multi-pronged educational campaign. And critically, this education is often best delivered not by administrators, but by respected physician champions.
Physician champions. So peer-to-peer education.
Exactly. Identifying influential physicians within key specialties like rheumatology, gastroenterology, oncology, who understand and support the biosimilar strategy, and having them educate their peers is far more powerful. It builds trust and credibility in a way that top-down directives usually don't.
What kind of information do these champions and the pharmacy team need to provide in this education?
It needs to be targeted content. You need to clearly explain the science behind biosimilarity again, maybe highlighting the rigor of the FDA's approval process. You should transparently share the institution's own evaluation process. Show them the P&T committee did its homework. And critically, you need to communicate the why, the financial benefits.
Showing how the savings will be used.
Yes, if possible. Showing how adopting the biosimilar allows the institution to save money that can then be reinvested in other patient care services, new technologies, or maybe even prevents budget cuts elsewhere. Making that connection explicit can be very motivating. You also need simple, clear materials for patients, explaining what a biosimilar is and reassuring them about the switch.
And underpinning all this implementation is the digital foundation getting the IT integration right.
It's absolutely non-negotiable.
Right.
And it has to be done correctly and promptly after the formulary decision. As we mentioned, every relevant IT system, EHR, CPOE, pharmacy system, billing system, must be updated with the new product's exact non-proprietary name and that unique 4-letter suffix.
Remind us again why that suffix is so vital in the implementation phase.
It's the key identifier. It ensures unambiguous identification of the specific product being ordered, dispensed, administered, and billed. It prevents mix-ups between the reference product and multiple biosimilars, which is critical for patient safety. It also allows for accurate tracking for pharmacovigilance if an unexpected side effect occurs, precisely which product the patient received. Failure to get the suffix right in the IT systems can undermine the entire initiative.
And using IT tools like clinical decision support, CDS, can actively help drive the implementation.
Absolutely. Once the IT systems are updated, you can leverage CDS. For instance, when a physician goes to order infliximab, the order set can default to the preferred biosimilar agent for the approved indications. They can still choose the originator if there's a specific reason, but making the preferred agent the path of least resistance, well, it significantly increases the likelihood it gets used. It steers behavior towards the formulary decision. Hashtag 4.2, measuring success with key performance indicators, a KPI.
Okay, so the implementation plan is rolling out, education is happening, IT is updated. But how do you know if it's actually working? No strategic initiative is complete without measuring the results. You need that data-driven feedback loop, right?
You absolutely do. You need to constantly monitor performance, demonstrate the value you're achieving or identify where you're falling short, and use that data to make adjustments. This requires defining clear key performance indicators, or KPIs.
What are the essential KPIs to track, particularly for, say, a biosimilar implementation? Let's start with the financial side.
On the financial side, probably the single most important leading indicator of success is the biosimilar uptake rate or conversion rate, usually expressed as a percentage. What percentage of the total volume for that drug molecule is now represented by the biosimilar?
So are people actually using it?
Exactly. It directly measures the success of your adoption efforts.
Yeah.
The education, the physician champions, the CDS nudges. You need to track this trend over time, maybe by department or specialty.
And how do you tie that back to the original financial promise?
By tracking the realized versus projected budget impact. You compare the actual dollar savings achieved based on actual purchasing data and uptake against the savings that were forecasted in the initial BIM. This is the key accountability metric. Are we hitting the financial targets we committed to? If not, why? Is uptake lower than expected? Is the net price different? This KPI tells you if the business case is panning out.
Okay, financials are key. What about the clinical and safety side? What KPIs matter there?
You definitely need to track safety. Monitoring the rate of adverse drug events, ADEs, is crucial, especially looking for any signals that might suggest an issue with the switch strategy. Even if it's just perception, addressing safety concerns quickly is vital for maintaining prescriber confidence.
And for the really expensive CGTs with those outcomes-based deals.
For CGTs, the clinical outcomes are the financial KPIs in many ways. You need meticulous tracking and reporting of those specific health outcome metrics that are defined in the value-based contracts. Is the patient maintaining remission? Are they transfusion independent? Did their vision improve as expected? Documenting and reporting this data accurately is literally how the institution ensures it gets the contracted rebates if the therapy doesn't meet the pre-agreed milestones.
So clinical outcomes become direct financial metrics there. Lastly, what about operational KPIs? How do you measure if the implementation efforts actually changed behavior?
A good operational KPI is the provider formulary adherence rate, specifically looking at new prescriptions or treatment starts. What percentage of new patients starting on this type of therapy are being initiated on the institution's preferred formulary agent, for example, the biosimilar?
Why focus on new starts?
It's often a clear indicator of whether the educational efforts and system changes, like CDS, are influencing prescribing habits moving forward, as opposed to trying to switch large numbers of stable existing patients, which can sometimes be more complex.
And having all this KPI data.
Having this data readily available, ideally visualized in a performance dashboard, allows pharmacy leadership to manage the process effectively. If you see uptake is high in oncology but lagging in rheumatology, you know exactly where to focus your follow-up educational efforts or investigate potential barriers. It closes the loop, turning the formulary decision into an ongoing cycle of implementation, measurement, and improvement.
Well, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive. It's clear that navigating this landscape of advanced therapeutics, biologics, biosimilars, CGTs, demands a significant evolution from pharmacy leaders. It's really about moving beyond the dispensary and the clinical review into becoming true strategists, sophisticated risk managers, and crucial system integrators.
I think that's exactly right. If we boil it down, there are maybe 3 key mandates for success that we've touched on throughout. First is scientific mastery, really understanding the nuances like why the 351K pathway and analytical similarity testing are scientifically sound. You need to be able to articulate that.
Okay, understand the science.
Second is strategic governance. Rethinking the P&T process, making it truly cross-functional, bringing in finance, supply chain, IT, maybe even senior leadership for CGTs right from the start. Proactive integration is key.
Right, build the right team.
And third is financial expertise, moving beyond just looking at drug prices to building robust BIMs, understanding health economics, and for CGTs, being able to actively participate in structuring and managing those complex risk-sharing payment models.
Scientific mastery, strategic governance, financial expertise, it really paints a picture of a much broader, more influential role for pharmacy. You know, the idea that you can use a BIA to accurately predict the financial impact and then structure payments based on actual long-term clinical results through something like an outcomes-based annuity. That fundamentally shifts the dynamic, doesn't it? It puts real accountability for long-term value back on the manufacturer.
It absolutely does. It aligns incentives much better towards durable outcomes.
So, the provocative thought we want to leave you, our listeners, with is this. How will this growing emphasis on strategic financial accountability especially the need to track patient outcomes over years, maybe even decades, to verify value. How will that change the pace and the nature of pharmaceutical innovation over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, and specifically, what kind of new infrastructure, maybe centralized data platforms, or new ways to handle patient tracking across different payers, will we need to make these long-term, outcomes-based models truly feasible and scalable, especially given the fragmentation of the U.S. healthcare system and patient portability?
That's a huge question. How do you track outcomes for 20 years when patients change insurers every 3?
And building on that, we really encourage you to think about the evolving role of pharmacovigilance and real-world evidence. As these incredibly potent, often one-time therapies become more common, collecting robust, long-term, real-world data on their safety and effectiveness outside of clinical trials will be absolutely essential for building confidence, refining their use, and ultimately ensuring sustainable patient access.
Lots to think about there. This has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the pharmacist playbook for advanced therapeutics.
This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.